当这些学个当做东巴尼家下的我输了俩我算钱，今天我算的那这个这个的那个落了闹啊拿心的爱的高度现在也那是蓬勃的，生命点都接不接的，这样这个是蓬勃的生命的个。遇到见想了对你主把电线照穷啊，热度电咋的落了闹完的，刚来对吧？没吧？绿把下巴了，下巴没让我的主把闹完的的，听你的听个没都是的结巴这些，但是我这东北你什么大大的，这些学会点点光写着吧。
Good afternoon. This morning we spoke about the need to come to recognize the object of negation in order to realize its non-existence and thereby realizing emptiness. So we first come to see how the object of negation, see how true existence appears to us. And then when we come to recognize that the self appears to us as truly existent, we then investigate, seeking this truly existent self, investigating within the body, within the mind, as presented this morning, and we'll come to see that the self, despite appearing as if it is established by way of its own essence, it doesn't exist in this way. It's empty of being established by way of its own essence, and therefore the self doesn't exist in the way that it appears. Rather, it is empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of being established by way of its own essence.
가짜 되지 뒤 동바들라 동비 동산 동바들라 동바니 사실과 동바니라 그러 진짜 내게 유 당아 저기 샘진기 되는 유 동바니 또야 유 동바니다 상계기 또야 유 동바니세 유 동바니들라 전시 샘바다 상계다 년도다 라게 수 또바네 유 동바니들라 차라요 말다 지부지게 가짜 가야 가 동바니들 지부지게 캐와주네요 말 다 유도에 그 로코론이야 다 로 이 야루 사바당 아니 사블게 캐버 연구하래 사블 어디 건데 그 디지 노보다 되와다 해 가질래
The object. The object of negation, then, true existence, inherent existence. This is where the object appears as if it exists by way of its own defining characteristics or is established by its own essence. And that terminology, what that means in, maybe you could say in a practical sense, is that it appears as if it is independent, doesn't require causes, doesn't require parts, it doesn't require imputation by mind, because it's self-existent or naturally existent. So that's the object of negation. When one comes to recognize that it doesn't exist, that it is empty of existing in this way, emptiness is realized. And the object of emptiness doesn't change whomever realizes it. If emptiness is realized by a sentient being or realized by a Buddha, the object of emptiness doesn't vary. However, the realizing consciousness, this certainly varies in terms of its strength. So the object realized, emptiness of inherent existence, this doesn't vary. But the realizing consciousness, this does vary in strength.
저기 제모제 중으로 변에 뉴스에 저러와 뉴스에 갑라 아니 지금 사실 개침부 갑라 저 구영부 지나 디가랴 알로집네 멍부 알로집제 투야체 사실 충충지리나 시라제 마소야 되네 지금 그러와 Then 아직 두 자들 배대 가지고 가서 점점나라 신포보는 무시가라 봐 지금도 신링부지가라 지금 알로자 휴제도도 와데 제 중도 와 가서 네 점어디 안 내내기 제투에데 당보고 사실 구양우지랴 제 되네 바장장 안 가서 지랴 신디가라 봐 제데 가브를 마사로야 되는 몽골이기도 와 지상한테 때못다데 안 가서 지려 고치 배지 주군이 알로 잡지 땡자야 알로 마로 잡 휴제도도 와데 고 장토라 해서로 와 알로 제가 직벌 메네사가 알로 디가 신디가 알로 제 직벌에데 알로 접서 사지들 최충 몽고요로 와 제사 되니기 전에 전부 주도 잡투와 충충가라 잡마투바 되는 용거로 디나싱아 저기 동반이 세디야 또바도 동반이 집어래데 이내 가시 배는 아주 다 그지 동반이 제듯이 가시 세도 디 라과 강라 또야 또네 또투또네 양 참모가라 가시 참모가 지제요데 한 디가랴 또마투바 용거래 제사 디고 장도를 지기지도 않고 차차차차 가시 마 또서기 시디 그 동반이 또서기 검서기 시디 파차차차차 단에 검야 용거로 와 차차차로요 가시 망보에 변 조스럽나 전부로 와 디나제다 디나데 뒤에 망보로 참모도 뭐로 디나징아 저기 동반이 또에기 시 가시 되라 당봉을 또에데 라바 된도 딘마진 차차차데 가시 또서기 시디바 차차차 존에 참모 된도 아니 이게 또네 공고로 와데
To take an illustration, if we think of a gymnast, a gymnast, no matter how skilled, can perform some remarkable exercises in just a small confined space. But in a far larger area, they will be able to do, whilst on the one hand, they'll be doing the same kind of exercises, they're having much more space, they'll be able to express themselves so much more. So we can see here within a confined space or large expansive space, the exercise on the one hand is quite the same, but in a larger space, the expression of that is quite different. So similarly, with the basis of negation, one starts with a coarse basis, with a particular basis of negation, and comes to quite a coarse realization. And then that basis of negation, one can make ever subtler. So, for example, one can start with a table, and this is quite a coarse basis of negation, but then one can go into the various subtle parts of a table and realize their lack of inherent existence. So here the basis of negation will become subtler.
디나싱 아주 동반이요 곰디 다 당보 락바 셈 아주 셈 나래 수다 셈 차라 망고용을 당보 락바디 되는 곰도 전에 나 공고지도 셈디마 곰요데 셈 락바디에 마마시도 셈 참어디에 방원이 교리고래 다 타마들이야 아주들 베셈 참어 휴주어에서 다디 아주기 디가서 뒤가서 디고래야 숨고 말에 세상 아주기 상화두배 냠내자 단 변의 님이 족신 냠내자 족신 공부해야 돼. 대소 공매의 동반이 공매디 나가 저기 셈 차쇼 디간래야 공고래. 세상 되니게 공제디 동반이 셈 참어 동시 최전 동반이 공세 시디 셈 참어 차쇼지 디간래 공고와 디 공도 갑라 디 공비기 로코랑양 배 참어 휴체고 로코랑기 동반이 또 로랑기 참모 로랑이 소소랑기 등도 동반이 곰비기 곰비기 갑지 용고로와 대소에는 조칭 곰바세다 안데니기 나게 냠는 토비 갑리야 동반이 곰이야 되네시 곰고를 제가 되니기 동반이 곰이야게 시베 셈나네 셈 차쇼듯이 니 곰간 코롱에 때도 소소랑랑 같은 동반이 곰이들이 소소랑랑 곰고래 제가 되니기 곰이데 베데 참모 제거를 돼서 나도 안주 갑라 셈 라바 되기 시고래
되니기 셈 라바 참모 바로 되고서 이니 아나서한테 유 유체기 거래서 유이데
동반이래와 동반이 검세 시디 가리 된 것은 샘 참모에 대해서 검고래지. 샘 참모에 대해서 검간 유 동반이 또한 로디야 샘 코로나를 샘 참모 코로나래. 동반이 또베 샘 참모 코로나기 때도 동반이 랑이 동반이 검고래지. 어디 디디는 검고래. 제가 디 검바에 샘 차셔디 쳐고. 제가 되게 저기 데 나게 냠는 더 쪽친 검세야 당은 상어뒤비 갑래 직되니기 아니요 검나다 되니기 시도 배 많이 시도 샘 참모들 많이 시고로 와든 샘 란이 그 동반이 검야데 샘 랑기 때도 검고래 샘 차셔디디
The emptiness that's realized, as was said in a couple of segments ago, this doesn't vary no matter whom realizes emptiness. The basis of realization, or the basis of negation, this can become subtler and subtler, as too can be the realizing consciousness. So when we meditate on emptiness, what the realization we may come to is going to come about independent on a realizing consciousness that is quite coarse. But through consistently training our mind, accumulating merit, purifying, studying, meditating, we'll start to be able to realize emptiness with a subtler and subtler realizing consciousness. And we'll be able to realize that the realizing consciousness itself is also empty of inherent existence. So we'll be able to realize the emptiness of the realizing consciousness too. The sutra presentation, developed in its entirety, doesn't lead one on its own to the cultivation of the subtlest realizing consciousness. In order to generate the subtlest of realizing consciousnesses, one needs to engage in the paths of Tantra. So, for example, engaging in the meditations associated with the highest yoga tantra of Guru Samaja, or in the Nyingma tradition, one would engage in Dzogchen. And in this way, one generates the subtlest of consciousnesses realizing emptiness. And in fact, the subtlest of consciousness will realize the emptiness of itself as well.
제가 그 동반이 검색의 시디 차라 개발 연구를 마도 유 동반이라 개발 제가 말다.
The object of meditation, this varies. The emptiness that is realized, this does not. Missed out one word. The subtleness of the object of emptiness doesn't vary in terms of subtleness, but there is a variety. There does the object being meditated on, that does vary in terms of subtleness.
나데네 대양 세워다 나데시 안저 가샤 랑원 유튜버게 자지 대파 까베 동반이 세지 송치 수서와 난 대양 가샤 나유 치사와당 치사와스 베네 가샤 템버투바세디 가야디 녀마 여바치 안다데 나주게 파 곰진 매바서 가야 되는 레베슨 되네 말해서 대다 대양 가샤 나유 치사와
Let's turn back to the text. So in page 6 and the second bullet point from the top. Further, it is not that the object of negation formerly existed and is later eliminated. So this then answers the doubt. So does establishment by way of its own entity, did it exist? And now through my meditation, it was made non-existent? And here this is clearly stated that is not the case.
Kasangi dusu nasa yoba deringi dusu nasal mi jumde sashi na yudongba tabu means.
Further, it is not that the object of negation formerly existed and is later eliminated, like the forest which existed yesterday and was burned by fire today, with the result that the area is now empty of the forest.
That the saji the tongba charo, jisan xingna ge tongba siguro, the saji de xingna ge tongba re, as do san saji de xingna tongba chaware la do, xingna de nye le yoba xie, dada meba cha son roba. Jisan di xingna de saji de xingna tongba re la do, nye le xingna yorwa da. Dada de gasha rashing drupa, temper drupa ge tongba re la do, gasha de dinashi mare, xingna na xingna yoba xie, and chisu meba cha yorbe dine mare, jisan gasha de dine mare siguro da.
The illustration then proves the point in the first part of the sentence. It is not that the object of negation once existed and now through the power of meditation it no longer exists. For example, if a bushfire destroys a forest, that area now, due to the strength of the bushfire, has destroyed the forest, and the area now is empty of the forest that used to exist there. This cannot be a simile for a metaphor for what has happened here. Rather, it is not that objects used to exist by way of their own essence, but through the power of meditation that has been eliminated. Rather, it's never existed.
The Toma Mebane, Yu Manyowi Gacha, said the Gacha, Temperature said, Tambani Zao in Jumyo Maris, Yoma Zao in your Maris or Jumanoma. Toma Mebane, Yu Manyowi Gacha. Di Tongpa, so that is a Toma Meba Dine, Timotruba se Gacha, the Zao in a Dampo in Jumano, the Zao in your Maris. Chizan Dining Meva, Dining maybe Gacha, Magacha Digi, that Tongpa said, Tongpa de la Tongpa in Sigurese.
Then the next bullet point is perhaps should rather all just go together under one. Rather, this is an object of negation which since beginningless time has been empty and never been known validly to exist. So the second and third bullet point probably should be together. Because what it's saying is that the object of negation has never existed. It's not that it formerly did and now it's been eliminated through meditation. Rather, it has never existed, not since beginningless time. It has never been known to exist. Realizing this, realizing that the object of negation is empty of existence, means one realizes emptiness.
가지고 신도로다 메도로다 가래 기회네 당보 사번 주고 사번 될라더니 기고를 마도 사번 메바도 지신다 메도라서 gün에 게메데 라바디 인가서 하고고로 와다 디나 신다 뒤지게 최 라바 참목 간듯이나 그런 게에 규지고래 규지라더니 기고를 뒤지게 셔담지 난 뒤지 마연비게 안에 신다 이나 안 딱와라서 이나 양직직레 되네 발뢰 파다고 뢰 직레 되네 현실레 되네 파샤고레스 샤고르 마도 찔라 마트 바치네 자오기네 하여 말와 지사 딱외 최네 교 현실라 마트 바 메레 뒤지기 최나 현실라 마트 바 메레 지사 되네사 마도 여바들라 고 니는 뒤네 하는 거 비릭지요 한 딱외릭 디니 마도 여 말와다 디니가 현실로 되는 주고 봐자 지사 강라야 마트 바 대신에 저 가짜디 덴버트 바세디 강라야 마트 바 뢰파 샤바 메바 마샤바 랑근원이 주바 샤르바다 디네디다 자오기네 메바레 가스는 딱와 있는 뢰파 따바다 현실로 되는 거고래 뒤지게 최에는 규단 견질에 되는 주고래 그래서 강라야 마트바디 뒤지게 최야 말에 강라야 마트바 따바 메레 그래서 디네 따바도 거 보니 가야 마인가기 현대 최지 샤야 말에 메바자 대신에 저기 덴버트 바세디 자오기네 유만용화래 사실 김선지식으로 와다
Everything that exists can be divided into permanent and impermanent phenomena, Or to express it differently, phenomena that do not momentarily change, permanent phenomena, or those that do change momentarily, impermanent phenomena. So everything that exists falls mainly into the impermanent class and a few into the permanent class. Amongst these, whilst they may appear, or whilst they do appear to our mind when we call them or we observe them, when they appear to us as being inherently existent, in other words, as being independent of causes, of parts, of imputation by mind, whilst they appear to us in this way, no phenomenon, whether impermanent or permanent, exists in this way, independently. Rather, all phenomena are dependent. They're dependent arisings. Phenomena that are permanent, so those that do not change momentarily, what are they dependent on? They're dependent on imputation by mind. So permanent phenomena are not independent. They are rather dependent on imputation by mind. Impermanent phenomena, the vast majority of phenomena, those that change momentarily, they too, whilst appearing to our mind as being independent, are in reality dependent arisings. They're dependent on having parts, they're dependent on causes, and they are dependent on imputation by mind. So therefore, all phenomena which can be divided into unchanging and changing, whilst appearing to the mind as being independent, none are so. All are dependent arisings. And this has been the case since beginning this time. There's never been a single phenomenon that has existed by way of its own essence, despite appearing so. When one realizes that no phenomenon exists by way of its own essence, but is empty of doing so, emptiness is realized. And then the next bullet point, also with respect to the way in which a phenomenon is empty of the object of negation, it is not like a tabletop being empty of flowers. This is similar to the illustrations we looked at last night, in that this is coming to understand what is meant by empty or emptiness, because this now is another illustration of how the word is used in everyday vernacular, but that is not the meaning here. So this table may be empty of having flowers on it, but realizing that doesn't mean one has realized emptiness. That is not the meaning of the word in our context, despite that being one of the ways it's used in the vernacular.
남가 동발에 세등한 주직된 대시바나 신가상 대 Geshe 대시 쇼게 Geshe 가상 Geshe 들어와 남가 동발에라도 남가 동발에라도 나저 템버 주마르 동반이세 기시고마 남가 동발에라도 남가라야 수기 토바다 레비그 수메바 메드 동만 남가 동발에라고와 나도 미기 토야게 수다 카도다 레야게 수메바 메드 메바 남가 동발에스라고와 진짜 디 동반이게 된 차고 말와 가상 슈바나인데.
Whilst it certainly isn't mistaken to say that a table that has no flowers on it is empty of flowers, or that space is empty because there's no objects in it, whilst one talks like this in society, and there's no mistake to talking like that, understanding what is being said there doesn't mean that one has understood emptiness. That reference has no relationship to the emptiness of inherent existence. Saying a table is empty of flowers or space is empty of objects, whilst not mistaken, has no reference to the emptiness of inherent existence.
당은 저 쇼게 샤바나신 가차 세디 가샤디 가르레스나 당은 저 가차 삼로 로리아 가차 알랍디 뎀바주발라야 당 가차라다 지고고 고르바다 제 제산 가차 세디 바 가야디라 가차라 식베시 당거 제 뎀바주바 세디 뎀바주바데 가고로 가차라네 뎀바주바데 고고르다 뎀바주바 랑신유 주바 모인이 주바세 식디네 베시다 차상 된다 지바레 지상 뎀바주바데 고고르바 지상 뎀바주바 세디 간식 레고레 람나 샹라 칸라 마 샹라 차실라 마되바 뢰파 샤발라 마되바 뭐니 줍되긴 될랑아서 뎀바주바 레고로와 제사 데니기 뎀바주바 가차 디기 다 동타디 간스 동고레 라네 베나가 저기 셰데 데니게 가차 뎀바주바 디기 가다 다디야 데니기 뎀바주바 디 동바레 아니 나서 수부디야 데니기 뎀바주바 디 동바레 디나신 칠로게 뭐보 변의 행동다 지행다 세지다 차상 되네 가자 되네 템버주바 동바래서 엔디나신 되네게 가자 템버주바 되게 딱봐 다 뒤마진 남가서 딱와 차상 되네 가자 템버주바 동바래 세지거로 동바래 시그로와 세상 가자디 시데라 안 수다 시아바다 딱바다 차상 여러 동비시 동시데라 세상 되네게 가자디 동바래 신루고 송거로와 세상 디 동나디 다네 대시 매도기 쪽도 동바다 지과 말해서 그래 동당 가가지해서 그래
각시 교리하레스 이니 이 갑자 교리 말해스
지상 가자디 동바래서 가자디 가자 템버도 쪽서디야 가자 템버도 동바래 미디안 가자 템버도 동바래 안 뒤마지 남가야 가자 템버도 동바래 시그로와다 지사디 동석이 시 가자 가시
The basis of negation. This will change. There are countless bases of negation, but the object of negation, this does not change. So whatever basis of negation one engages with, the object of negation will not change. So the object of negation is true existence, or inherent existence, or established by way of its own essence, or established by way of its own defining characteristics, any of those synonyms. So that is the object of negation. That will not change. The basis of the negation, that can vary. We spoke at length this morning about the basis of negation being the self. Then one will investigate the object of negation, the truly existent self. Or one can look at an outer phenomenon, such as a table. That then would be the basis of negation. Its true existence would be the object of negation, the table's true existence, coming to see whether the table exists in the way that it appears to mind or not, whether it has its own tableness or exists by way of its own essence. Or likewise, if one takes an object, a basis of negation such as a particular consciousness, or if one takes any other outer phenomenon, or a permanent phenomenon, whichever object one takes, this will be the basis of negation, so that changes. But whatever the basis of negation one is investigating, one investigates the same object of negation, whether that phenomenon exists by way of its own essence, whether it is or truly existent or inherently existent.
가자 템버 주비게 쪽스 동바래라도 가서 쪽스디 템버 마주바래래 거라 쪽스 템버 마주바래 가사디야 나세야 템버 마주바래 네 풍보디야 템버 마주바래 근데 최 간데시네 뒤지게 최 간데시나다 딱바 간데시나다 지혀바 차상 템버 마주바래 스거로 저 템버 주바세디 뭐 템버 마주바래 지산 템버 주바디 동바래 세데 가 직배제다나 가르마도 된다 지바래 템버 주비 동바래 라야 대당 최근에 지나디 템버 주비게 템버 마주바래 세지어와 디 템버 마주바래 세지 자 제사다 디네게 템버 마주바 있나 템버 마주바 세지 간니치로 고고래 세지 마슈고르디네
Again then, the basis of negation, these are innumerable. They include the self, outer phenomena, consciousnesses, permanent phenomena as well. The object of negation, for example, true existence, or the object of negation which is true existence or any of its synonyms, this doesn't change no matter what the basis of negation is. And therefore, when one realizes that that object of negation doesn't exist but is rather empty, then the emptiness of the basis of negation, there is also not a variety here. So if one realizes whatever the basis of negation is, that one then comes to realize the emptiness of its object of negation, the emptiness that is realized, this too doesn't vary. So, if we start at the one end, the basis of negation, variety. Object of negation, this doesn't change. It's always true existence or any of its synonyms. The realization that that doesn't exist, the emptiness, this doesn't change either. And as was mentioned earlier, the realizing consciousness, this will vary in terms of its subtlety or power.
Gache demba drupa tongpa re chi shikirwa da di tongpa ina tongsu di khande re labna da gashi dini gache ngor meba mebe duen si gashi dini gache digi ngor madrupa tila ane gache demba drupa tongpa lagi re jire.
Now we come to the final bullet point in this outline. The meaning is that the base of the negation itself does not exist in the entity of the object of negation.
That is in the sugar some Jabacheta Chivare, Chesanga to Ta setting out to Lola Karanangdulana, Gala Tubamiba Rangung when you truba now and Hashinji, Manzuke Na Sadi, Denishi, Lola Kikasa. Chashe dang le xaba la ma de rang ngwen de zhuba chi ga sa nga se de de ne ge re de se be che ba che de de ne ge zao yin de ma zhuba nga se de de ne zan zao yin de me ba de tong de dong ba ni se dong ba se di xi ru wa che sa de xue wei xie ba na xin ma zu ga cha de ga se ne jian gan na jian da xian gang la yan la cha xie gang la ma de ba le pa xia ba la ma de ko rong wen de zhuba de ga cha de xie. Tanga said, Denigi, now and I in Denigi Rebesne, Tangadi Dini Remindus, the Remindus. Dana, my by the tone of the Domba, or the Domba, said the Disigua.
We can come to understand this through reminding ourselves of the illustration this morning. In the meditation, the first step is to see how the self appears to the mind. This self, like all objects, appears to consciousness, appears to the mind as being independent. Independence of parts, independence of imputation. And this then is the meaning of true existence. Then one investigates whether the self exists in this way or not. So it appears to us in this way, it appears to our mind in this way. So is this appearance in accordance with reality or not? One investigates in the way that was mentioned this morning, and one comes to see that no, it doesn't. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of being independent, it's empty of being truly existent, it's empty of being established by way of its own defining characteristics. And therefore, we come to realize the emptiness of the object of negation, the emptiness of the truly existent self, and we realize that the self does not exist in this way. It is empty of existing truly. In this way, one comes to realize emptiness, the emptiness of true existence.
Gangla ya Matuba, Ranguni, Dubai, Gang, Guda, Jin, and the Jigge, Yala, Chashe, Gangla Matuba, Lupa, Shabala, Matuba, Ranguni, Dubai, Yedibadi, Nata, Jibanangori, Nangori. Jisan Denig Nawadi, Tanga the Pumbodi, and the Gandhi Wins, Denig Nawana, Shim Pumbodi, Guda, Jin, your Maribes, Chibajid. Pumboding and the Guliki Bagarson, Pumboding and Chunchunia Church, but the Sable Hakorwa, Chesna Dene, Pumbodia Church, Kala, and Sejula Tingio by the Hakorwa, Chesna Dene is that the Pumbodinalena, and Shata, Papa, Rugoda, Dene Rigman, Zeman, Uyo, but the Chasan Zomdio by Chagore, Chesna Dene is a Pumbo Sedi, Kala Yamatuba, Lupa, Shabala Matu, Ranging on the Tubadi. Pumbodi di ngo tawa ni duminu sembe samta de pumbodi de mama duba samtang gorwa to gorwa.
In this morning's meditation, the basis of negation was the self. And the basis of negation, as has been mentioned, there are innumerable bases, so we can change this and change it from the self to the aggregates. The meditation remains the same. The basis, though, has changed. So now we're going to investigate the object of negation in relation to the basis of negation, being the aggregates. The object of negation is how the aggregates appear to our mind as truly existent. So meditation remains the same as this morning. First, we come to see how if we look at the physical aggregates, how does the body appear to our mind? So it too, like all phenomena, appears to us as being truly existent, meaning independent of parts and causes and imputation, as if it has its own essence, its own self-existence, something that is, because it's self-existent, it doesn't require, it's not influenced by anything at all, it doesn't require anything at all, it's independent of causes, parts and imputation. So this is how our body appears to us. And we go through the investigation just like we mentioned this morning, and we can readily see that despite the body appearing in this way, it clearly is dependent. It has grown so much, so it changes momentarily. It's dependent on causes such as food and exercise. It's dependent on parts. It has many parts, and those parts have their own parts going down into the smallest of particles and going beyond that. And in this way, we come to see that despite the body appearing to be independent, it is in fact dependent. To express it differently, despite the body appearing to be truly existent, it is empty of true existence.
Dine sungorwa, dine zadane, azuke dadite, and that Gasa inade, Pumbo inade, Chi ngobo chinange, Takpa, Kande Chine, that Dember Daxing Jibitsena, Lola Nawana, Shinji, do it, Midu Jebachina, Ganye, Don Sanjima, Dombani mother, near your marriage or your marriage. Tan the Meba rebel and Pumbo de Meba rebel, Gasa Meba rebel, Gasa yore, Pumbo yores. And Chi Tapa the Mobola so yores. Canis yore lamna, Lupa Tapa them yores were done. Shen the Chashela Due, Shen Guda, Shen Chila Due, Lupa Tapa them yoba hesere. The Tenju Lula, the Sungor, Zadi, Bema Sigi, that Manzuki Tenju Big Tawa, Tarduk the Chagore.
Any phenomenon that appears to mind, whether it's the self, whether it's the aggregates, whether it's particular consciousnesses or any outer phenomenon, whatever that object is, it appears to us as if it is independent. So again, a synonym for independent is true existence, and we know that now, hopefully we know now, there are many synonyms for true existence, such as established by way of its own essence or inherently existent. So whatever object we think of, naturally, innately appears to us as being independent or truly existent. We then go through the meditation as was described this morning, and we come to see that despite the object, again, whether it's a self, the person, or if we're looking at a particular consciousness or an outer phenomenon, despite appearing to the mind as being independent, it is actually dependent. It appears as independent of parts and causes and imputation by mind, but it's actually dependent on those. Or to express it with synonyms, the object appears to consciousness as being truly existent, but it's actually empty of existing truly. It appears to be at the mind as having its own self-nature, but it's empty of having its own self-nature. And then, as with this morning's meditation, the last step is, but that doesn't mean that the object of our meditation, or the basis of negation, is non-existent. It doesn't exist in the way that it appears to mind. That is because true existence itself is a non-existent. But phenomena do exist, but how they exist is as a mere imputation by mind. So again, no phenomenon exists in the way that it appears to mind as truly existent. Rather, they are empty of true existence. Yet that doesn't mean they are completely non-existent. A true existence is non-existent, but phenomena exist as a mere imputation by mind.
Prime Minister said that in this Yorwada. Says I midi Wesho Lanche, Wesho Luci, Wesho Malu Niel Midelia, and Nicasa Prime Minister Lago Marwa. Na that Wesho Luci, quite top Sarche, top Sarne, and called Gigliagaleagi and Damja Fuya Yorwada. Then you soon call a Mingalo, some Prime Minister Lagorwa. They see the called Prime Minister said, Dambon Drew Marwa. Chesa das meeting the Chigbare Yamani, Michigare, Kolia, Prime Minister's Patavare. Chesa and you told the call Patabar Kolia. Down the call Prime Minister Chayomar. Chesa called Mijing as we show Damtunja, then call Prime Minister as Palu Patavare. That's how Chella Cookedy Toina, all Prime Minister Lesson they do Spadu to go quick Geshe Prime Minister Geshe do said, Mazukadina di Bejdangorwada.
To give an illustration to show what is meant by imputation by mind, when a country elects a new prime minister, being a new prime minister, even when they have won their election, they are not yet a prime minister. They first have to probably stand in front of a flag with their hand on their heart and say some promise. Then everyone calls them Mr. or Miss Prime Minister, but only from that moment. The person hasn't changed in the sense that they're someone before, someone after, but now they are called Prime Minister. So it's very clear. We are imputing Prime Minister onto this person, but only now, not before. So this is an illustration of imputation by mind, imputing Prime Minister onto a particular person, imputing the characteristic of Prime Minister onto a particular person.
Then the Prime Minister go Lord Dushe Sangache, Zorua, Lord Duyun Sajo, Longa Sassen, that Bomba Savage Leadu, that the Jingbody Bachi de la called Prime Minister Lagmarwa. That called Surbas as means that Surbas means that mother Prime Minister Lagmar, Coach Geshe Vanagana, Prime Minister Chitulagum. Just a logic, Shandaji Taji, Kolia, that the she Prime Minister Palot died, Chevi Capture, and called Surbas means the Surbas time, Prime Minister Lagoma. Just a called Prime Minister said, not Palo Patasha Pachimado, Korongi Penny Gubjigi Chane. Prime Minister is in Juyon Haji, Palo, Matapache, Korongwene, my Prime Minister is in Juyon Haji, Leo Marwa. Lupa Matawache, Korongwene, a Prime Minister in Juyon Marwa. Just a Lupa Tavan, Prime Minister, Lupa Tadu, Prime Minister Chavare. That Logi, Mata Nielene, Prime Minister Chayomare. 这把路径靠就是做出的，怕路个样怕下山呢，靠了舒服是明大的，那靠 Prime Minister 说的，也没有下山是吧？这是的靠了 Prime Minister 怕的，靠 Prime Minister 说的，路怕大小吧，起码都可能我呢 Prime Minister 主要嘛的。
With all the joy of attaining their political goal, the reality is their prime ministership is impermanent, and eventually the vote won't go their way, and then no longer will the title prime minister be imputed onto them. Now they get a new title, probably an unwanted title, ex-prime minister or former prime minister. But this too is imputed by mind. They weren't called former prime minister while they were prime minister, and they certainly weren't called former prime minister before they were prime minister. But to be called thus, mind has to impute that title onto them. Without mind imputing the title prime minister or former prime minister onto them, they're not going to be prime minister. And this is because they do not have this particular characteristic of prime minister in their very essence. They require imputation by mind in order to be called prime minister or later ex-prime minister. And most probably in the world right now, some engineers are working this weekend designing a new car, a new model that will come out in a few years' time. And they're creating this new design. And when they want to talk to a colleague or they go home at night and want to describe their day, all they can describe what they were doing is saying, I'm working on a new car. That's it. Only sometime later, when maybe someone in marketing places a name to that designed car, will they be able to say, the car I've been working on for the last many months or years, it is going to be called whatever it's called. And then they can talk about it in relation to that name. Until the name is imputed onto that car, they cannot talk about that car under that name, because it needs to be imputed first by mind.
Paul said, Monsieur Vene, Ami Gay and then Lamsa, Did la Yamarwa. Ami Gay on then they call me 신이 콜에 제시 세트파 다사회 첼이야 어미체 제시 라그로와 어미 제시도 라그로와 제산디 제시 세데 랑근 원에 두바 현지 라마되바 제시 세데 가르르 뛰어서선 르파 다발을 뛰어서하데 뛰어바로와 르파 다바 인장고 다발을 뛰는고 제시 차성래 르마다 있나 제시 메레데 르마다 있나 당번에 아니 아미기요네 제시 세데 주요 말에 아미기요네 지게래 이나 대 제시 차라요나 아니 볼 책이나 가르책이나 하고요 말로 민마다 이래 제가 그 당번에 제시 세데 그 랑은문에 주바나 그렇게 요는 제시 세데 그거 민다 그거 말로 제가 디요 말로 제가 가지고 파 제시 스타데 제시 안 제마래 아주 미디 민제베 잡제 스링세 따반 된 제시 라기면 스링 미샤상에 스링라고 그러와 제가 그 민당아서 뢰파 따발에 뛰고 제가 뢰파 따발 제가 두스는 아주 두스 라과라파 삼타나 뢰파 따발에 뛰어 임바드 라과 임바딩 아주 세 하고도 되네 삼타는 곧파 차차 심주시네 참을 파 하고도 연구하러
Similarly, when one gets the good news from a pregnancy test, one doesn't say, "Oh, fantastic, I'm pregnant with Tashi." This would be a really strange thing to say. I'm pregnant with a child. And as the child grows within oneself, one will not refer to the child as Tashi until the parents decide that will be the name of their child. And if someone else were to refer to the being inside the mum's womb as Tashi, there'd be a little bit of surprise, because that name has not yet been imputed. In fact, the parents may well have no idea who's been spoken of. But once the parents have decided that the child will be called Tashi and have announced to others, everyone will refer to the child to be born or the newborn as Tashi, and will continue to be called as such, until maybe the child becomes more commonly known by a nickname, and then Tashi may become forgotten. But now the new name is perhaps Tsering. This will be applied at all times. So here it's very clear again that this name needs to be imputed by mind onto the object before it has relevance.
디디레 소소라나 캬바진 주용하지 메르와 제가 차상 팔로 따발된 주티가죠 제가 간신의 롤파 뛰고 롤파 따발로 뛰어버려야지 마도 롤파 따발로 마 뛰어봐 가야요 말서 거다.
This is the case not just with cars and people, but all phenomena require imputation by mind. If you walk in a garden with a botanist, they will be calling this variety of plants around them by an incredible array of names that to most of us are completely unknown. But those names are known, and they have all been imputed by mind. Before those names were imputed onto the object, they couldn't be known by that name. But now each and every different plant and all the varying plants, varying parts, have their own name. And all of these have been imputed by mind. So everything that exists in dependence on imputation by mind.
미두 세대 한지 가르다고 알았으네 미디기 수부제 통용도 어게 미디 통성하라고 그래 마도 나 가사세 데미디지로 왔지다네로 진짜 당주 수부 통용도 어게 통성하서 그 통성하서 그 수부도 봐 구겨 다제 룽기 대해지고 공부에 보여줘도 어거 로우도라고 그래 진짜 저 세대야 그 공부에 될파 뢰파 다샤바 가사세다 나중에 뢰파 다진데라 그 수부통 수부들 가사스 봐 뢰대고 당한주게 nga se de nga ju supu de dago chisa dini Gabriela nga se nga supul pha nga se dago Gabriela nga ju chowa la dago Gabriela ya dinga ju ge dushi le la bala da ya da dini gi dago ba nga ju bene nga de ye se de nga ju supu de ku yo ma ta che le de be kabla nga de yo samlo de damara ta chu go ba pa ji 바자 되어 마치 계세 되어 마치 거라자 삼나초고 이네 수부디 되다 나데데 예라고 수부디 파 공바 접제 파조디 마주고 예라고 디가서 나저 나세 수굴 파 뢰파 다가서 최고래 뢰파 따고래 다디 디젤이 셔 좋아다디 셔셔야
All phenomena require imputation by mind, or rather, all phenomena are dependent on imputation by mind. The phenomenon that is a person, when one wants to examine or investigate whether a person exists or not, we come to see that the person too is imputed by mind. Usually, we think to a person, what will come to mind when you think of a person, or even ourself, it's usually the body, the form aggregate. So a person itself is actually a non-associated compound phenomena. But usually, when we think of a person, we think of their body. And so we'll think of someone or ourselves. So what am I doing? I am sitting. I walked here earlier. So we impute person onto the body. And when we say I'm sitting here, we're referencing the activity of sitting. And we're saying, because my body is sitting, I am sitting. So we're imputing the person onto the body. We don't, of course, only impute person onto the body, onto the form aggregate, but also onto the other aggregates. For example, the feeling aggregate. If we sit here and think, how are we? We will say, I'm feeling quite happy, or I'm feeling not so happy. And what we're doing is we're imputing person onto this mere feeling. So therefore, we see again that onto a feeling, this consciousness, we also impute person.
수기 풍보, 초유 풍보, 두시 풍보, 두시 풍보, 넘버시 풍보, 나요라. 지상 풍보가 뭐 강로지라 가브렐 풍보, 수기 풍보라 따요, 뢰파 따 나세 따고래. 가브렐라 초유 풍보라 나세 따고래. 가브렐라 두시 풍보라 나세 따고래. 가브렐라 넘버시 풍보라 나세 따고. 지상 풍보가 뭐 강로지라 파뢰 나세 따 삼기, 따바 삼기 나리요레스. 마도 뢰파 나세 뢰파 따바 마이 풍보가 뭐 강로 따바 마이 바 그런 거에 줍되게 뢰파 맞다바지 그런 거에 줍되게 나디 대신에 셔바나진 제니예요 말이지 올다 한수디 돈다지 식으로 와
We impute the self onto the body, onto the form aggregate, onto the feeling aggregate, onto any of the aggregates. We impute person onto any one or the collection of the aggregates. So why is this so important? Because the self, like all phenomena, appear to the mind as being independent of causes, parts, and imputation by mind. But here we see that self is imputed onto the aggregates. So therefore, the way the self appears as being independent cannot be how it exists because it clearly is imputed. It is imputed onto the body, I am sitting. It's imputed onto the aggregate of feeling. I'm happy, etc. Therefore, despite the self appearing as being independent or truly existent, it is clearly dependent on imputation by mind.
Bendigo, le taba zemi yore says mato le taba mayimba, Rangungan to be get Dina Shinga the Pumba Samda Chuk and le taba zemi pa le pa taba zemindi, Yuba Charumato, le mataba, Maduba, Gayameva, Cesa, the Shingan to get Ming, Chicken Motra, Dadangan to do some Pumba diet, that is who some Chisangane, le tapas. The tapa said in Namka said Taba said Namka Lavido Carla Horsene. Delia Toba the Ragba maybe the don't say the Lupa Namka Sepa Dagorova, Lupa Namka Pataba some yoga. Lupa Matana, the one called Namka Minji Namka said Luta Mena, Minji Tameben, then the Karina said the Lapish didn't Palapshing Marwa, just not put Tapas me your as you.
All phenomena, everything that one thinks of, appears to the mind as being independent or truly existent. But all phenomena are dependent on, for example, imputation by mind. There is nothing that is not dependent on imputation by mind. We need to then investigate in terms of impermanent phenomena as well as permanent phenomena. So impermanent phenomena, the material world outside, the person, individual consciousnesses and so forth, as well as permanent phenomena such as space. So how is a permanent phenomenon such as space also dependent on imputation by mind? Space is that which is free of contact. It's unobstructed, it's free of contact. But this too needs to be named. So therefore, it is dependent on imputation by name and thought. Consciousness needs to impute space onto the word name space onto space for it to exist as space. So therefore, all phenomena, whether impermanent, momentarily changing, or permanent, that which does not change momentarily, are dependent on imputation by mind.
Penny Shinojila, Gansa, sent Palo Dasha Vena, Pagansa Chagrives, Pagidi Gansa Yoribes, Namna, and Denichayo Marazor. Just not go Tabale, Dashi de la Gansas, Palo Tayo, Digi, Gansagi, Jawaji, Nubachko, Jawaji Gores, Jawaji Nubachin, the Gurmado, Jawaji Minubachilla, and then Jiggy Dasha Vena, called Tabaine, Jigo Maresi, they call it Tabade, Donata Chago Mares.
A few segments before, it was mentioned that person is imputed by mind onto the aggregates. Therefore, the person is not independent because it is rather dependent on imputation by mind. This is the case for person, it's the case for everything. All phenomena are dependent on imputation by mind. So a doubt may arise. If phenomena are dependent on imputation by mind, why can you not impute one name of one phenomenon onto another and say that's how it exists? For example, impute person onto a tree outside. Mind imputes person onto the basis of a tree. So, does that mean a tree now exists as a person? Well, the answer to this doubt is that the object needs to be able to perform the function that it's been labeled as. So a person needs to be able to perform the function of a person to be a suitable basis to be labeled person.
다 되네 인자 되시 가서 가르 송송선에 다 동반이 있어 가자 템버트비고 베능아 주게 다도 템버트 동바레스 때 가자 디용을 매바제라 동바레스 그래서 되시 시사마다 다 되네 인자 디네기 소라 디네기 되네 인자 다 디네기 강기 동규의 가자 다기 줍체 망해 봐서 망해 봐 먹어 와서 그래 강기 동야 가자디 하 먹어 와지 다기 줍되는 다기 줍나 되니 줍고리에서 비그 줍차디 하 먹어 봐 있나 디민 지양 매바라서 그래 되네 디레 디마레 세데 하 가야 로리아 차이 책 말해지 디 동바레 동바 말해서 로리 차이 말지사 당보가도 동바니 세 제바라 당보 가자디 무슨고 로리아 되네 지라 가자 세데 무슨고 그래서지 제상 가자디 데모 줍나 되네 줍고 그래서 비게 가자디 무슨고 로리아 무슨고 그래서 디로디 뭐 마송 와제 동바니 공부 세데 디레 디베 가야 매바지 동바지 고면데 동바니 공부 되 말해서 그래 디민 지양 매발 동참매위 동상장 동반이 된 때는 미에서로
Then this bullet point continues. Because of this key point, without ascertaining the object of negation of which phenomena are empty, in other words, the measure of establishment of the self, the meaning of emptiness will be nothingness, without any sense of this and that, a mere vacuity like a transparent, empty sky. This is unequivocally not the case. In brief, then, one has to come to understand how it is said that phenomena are established, how phenomena are established, so that one can recognize the appearance of true existence, and then be able to recognize that phenomena do not exist in this way.
디네 자다 저기 다 된다라 디시 쇼회는 아주 가르 시고 된다 인보데 가르람나 저 뭐에 숨고야디 가자 세디 덴버주바라데 가네치 레그리에스네 규단 진 차시 뢰파 따바라 마되바 코롱원에 지여바이나 디네 지여바이나 덴버주바라 고래 예제르와다 덴버주바레 디네기 로르 양안주 로르 나도 디네시 취 가네치라 따나 가랑수게 따여도 디네시 능고레스 제가 디나와 나신 다가라레 선별로디 딘진라고 그래요.
Let's start the summary of what we've looked at then. There's some key points that I really hope is clear for everyone that you can take away and recall because they will come up again and again. The object that needs to be negated is true existence or any of its synonyms, and it's good to know these synonyms because the text uses all of them. And what does it mean? What does true existence means? Well, how would an object exist if it were truly existent, or if it were established by way of its own essence? Because of being established by way of its own essence, it would be independent. So this is a key thing to remember. Whenever one hears any of these synonyms, it means if the object existed in the way that it appears as, for example, self-existent, it is independent. Independent of what? Causes, parts, and imputation by mind. That's how it would exist. Something that was established by way of its own essence wouldn't require be influenced by parts or causes or imputation by mind, because it exists by its own essence. So this is how phenomena appear to us. They appear to us as being truly existent, and then a consciousness grasps at them or apprehends the phenomenon as existing in this way. And this consciousness is called true grasping. Consciousness of true grasping grasps at a phenomenon as existing truly.
삼다제 당아 저기 풍부하다 아 저기 샘디게 규단 긴 셴了对吧略怕大堂的대시 시반의 뢰파도 두세大堂的삼다제 되네게 삼다위토네 한다 rāla lōla nāwa nāshīn rāngwa nyo chūpa di mindu sēmpeke tā samtāya di ngā tōngpa nī chepa che tāng tā dēne shī tā chakora dīringi shūya di dēne shī dēne zā ngā chūki dī kora dēne samtāya tā dēne ki chiki hāhuaya ki tuandāla ya chiki Lama tā yidam sāngyel ya chiki ngā chūki molandya ya ngā chiki that Kawasaya di Dusche Hoyadi, Anzukit, Diring Lobsang Dorje, and you should test to Adinesa, Cotuara Yuna, Dana War. The that Ta said the Nation to Kasha to Moson Rova, is a loss of Pumbo said the Tianjin Gudan, Jen, Shala Sim said, Gudan Shen. Din Jubaresha, which is a din Jubaza, Dinigi, Din the Mutumba, some that Dinjin Jewa, some that Din or Jugumindus and Big, some that Chagoreja.
And this morning, I mentioned in some detail how to engage in the meditation on selflessness. And this can be applied to any phenomenon, because as we heard this afternoon, every phenomenon that appears to our mind, whether an outer phenomenon or an inner thought, such as the self or another consciousness, all appears in the same way, as being truly existent. Then one needs to investigate, in the way presented this morning, coming to see whether the object is independent, as it appears to the mind, or whether it is actually dependent on causes, parts, and imputation by mind. So that was presented this morning, and that meditation then leads to one coming to realize that the phenomenon doesn't exist in the way that it appears, and then lastly, but it does still exist, but not in the way that it appears as truly existent, but as a mere imputation by mind. So that's the meditation I encourage you to engage in, because it's of such importance. And in your meditation, or at the outset of your meditation, turn your attention to the Buddha and your Lama and Yidam, make supplications and prayers for inspiration and blessings. Also, don't just engage in this meditation, but engage in acts of accumulation and purification so as to aid one's meditation. So then we can conclude for today, we can conclude here. There's still time, so if you have some questions, then please feel free to ask.
I've got a question out of something that came up in our discussion group, and it sort of relates to the end part of this. So it was where Geshe was talking about a table that we call a table, and we know the function of a table. And when that was introduced to a tribe in the Amazon, they named it as a fruit picker because they would stand on it to pick fruit. So I'm just wondering how that relates to how we can't impute person on tree. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's in relation to how we can't impute person onto the tree because the tree can't perform the function of a person. What about a object such as a table, where everyone here accepts it's a table, but in a culture other than ours, they would not recognize this as a table, but would recognize it as something else. So therefore, how can the one object be validly labeled in different ways?
Yeah, yeah.
In moment als yesterday also JDL kapla tene rolling kapla tene petsen chikile dele nazo tsama nazo kitula choche ya dele economic chikan dope ya bare dine dömmi mi kashe konso choche tongyong ya bare dele konsola choche tema dampo tongtu dele konso ming shempa pakson kadesa di gangla degiles dele konso shingdong ne Shinto tapto gides di dokia nangsine. Any conso min loke taxo. Gini dene di jugina
di gorwa di koron sugi karsene ko kariming tabe na koron ming tabe gi korongi tabige ta korons tabige donda dugorwa benanga zu lumba kha jihab kha ge min kha ta kha yorwa di ko min ta midar ma to di des kyos ka chago mare da dengan zu xingdong le mi se ta ban de mi gi da xingdong le mi se ta han de su ji yong ba wa jisa de ne xingdong le mi ji ta ba na xin ji xing pa lue ta ba na xin ji chago ba na ane xingdong mi jawa ji tu go ma jisa de ne ge xingdong pa mi ji da ni ga zu gi xingdong le mi sen da na da chu gu wa de yo ko mi la ne mi ring xingdong sa de lab chu gu be ne mi le ya sen ge se mi da go wa je mi dang ge ne sen ge ma wa jisa ko di ming di mingwen에 말해서래 그래서 답이 미래 담이래서 아주 민다다래 의미다 담이 생기셔그래 제가 밀리아 생겨서 민다바디 담이래 마도 의미 책고 말 의미 맞춰서 그 생기기 자와지고 말와 제가 담이래서 제가 다대간도 되미 미리당 아주기 가지 시대 따하디 디고 개발 가야 말 그런 소소라는 게 따하 지금으로 근데 잘라지네 네, 이게 민다사 소소라 민다사 가가 중국으로 가대.
Yes, so these illustrations are really good to think of, because in this particular instance, a table can validly be called, what did you say, a fruit picker? A fruit picker, because in dependence on that particular culture, maybe in this case, it fulfills the function of that name. So therefore it is valid. And it clearly lacks any defining essence that makes a table only a table. Because in a different culture, this table validly performs the function of a fruit picker. So one further thing, and then furthermore, if you take your knowledge of English language and different cultures, so some cultures call the same thing, so some English language speaking cultures call the same object by a different name. So it has the same function, but is applied a different name, and both are correct because within its context it is able to fulfill that function. And then one further thing to add is there are two maybe you can say two types of names that are imputed. Someone can call someone else a lion, for example. There's nothing stopping them. They can say that person there is a lion, and they can go through their life calling that person a lion. Doesn't make them a lion because they can't fulfill the function of a lion. So that person who's been called the lion continuously by this one person, their name, lion, is merely imputed. One type of name, it's not an actual name. So we can talk about an imputed name and an actual name. So the actual name or the real name is the name that is in accordance with the function that it can fulfill. But you can call anything by anything, but it doesn't make it what you're saying it is. So that was just one additional bit.
Thank you.
Okay.
So if you go into Bunnings and ask for a fruit picker and they give you a table, it really doesn't have the function of a fruit picker until you put it in context. So why wouldn't the same apply for the lion? You call somebody a lion, it's in the right context.
So if they went into a zoo and they performed the functions of a lion. They grew a lot of hair around their head. Any other?
That would have only to be established by convention, isn't it? It's established. Once it's established, then it fulfills the function, isn't it? If it's not established yet, you could call something, a new invention, you could call it anything you like.
Yes. So something needs to be established by convention for the name to be appropriate, maybe, yeah? Okay. Otherwise, because you can't call a new invention by something, when that's known, then that name works. Then it's established, yeah. Mazo penas chala sapa sakyam sena, di circente di mingdambo 다기려레스. 이니 공 직부디 하거나 데니 디밍 페트당나 펜톡민도 이니 차마 디켈렌제나 차마 하거나 차마 켈렌제나 데니 드리도 데니 드리도.
디르완 집에절라베 당보 그런 거 쇠기 마수니에네 체시디에 쇼라 데니 쇠긴 세비 그런 거 삼로 나려야 똑바 나려야 차상아지 된지 최고래. 그런 쇠진 그런 게 민이 뒤따긴 선비기 차상 체시딘 차래. 데니 쇠 차네 그런 게 민이 뒤따도 데니 차상기 딘 개된진 주고로 와다. 디 치수 그 민따 차외 제라 그런 체시디 민따 차외 제라 현대 지금 민 현대 다변에 킬링 말와디. 제사디 민 델야 민 다절 캠볼라고 다절 캠볼라나 민따 한게 당보다 한게 나즈빈데 캠볼라네 기수다 결론 좀 당보 두캔디 라면 캠볼라고 와 디나신 그런기 잘라 사바 튼 사바 중앙제 그런기 디 민디 띠따고 선비 꾸노치리 민 당보 따 서외제라 차상이 민디 딜랍도로와 딜라고로와 제사 디 뭐네 차고로와 제사다 나 가시 양직 미치부 그 타마쳐버제 데니그 쇠제 간 가시 되도록 시장하서 민가를 따는 야사래 스파 되도록 제제 민디 따긴선 양 타서제 민 따용으로 디따 서외제야 차상이 디베제도 안 주고 그러봐자 제사 당보 따겐 데니그 우리 쌈다 따야지 코로지 따야지 차고로와
데니 공기 비코선 데니 공기 주야캬파 데니 샴피가레 마초 렉션 마초 참마디 조치라기레 미셴파 용도 조치마레 이니 공기 딱딱해 데니 공기 렉션 디 주기도 공기 렉션 참마디 켈렌제기레 마초 렉션 디 참마디 켈렌제기레 디나 잡아
예, 내가 그 민 랍탕 카가레마도 베닝한 주기 쪼스 말하면 그 민 랍네 라베나 베네 뭐 저기 분발에 그러 베길에 분발에 그래 왜냐 산스크리트 칼라샤래 그래 제가 그 민다상 가가레마도 된다라 찍고 찍으라고 와 제가 디 고다 쳐야도 아니 나는 엔지니어인데 가려고 그래 아 디라고로 와 제가 와 스케일에 분발등에 힘으로 와 제가 분발 디라고 하고 그러 와 아니 네데 분발 해서는 디에 그 어디 와서 디치 키용으로 진짜 디 돈다 찍바 민카 디기다 소소 검시다 디네게抓到的 민카 차고마도 돈다라 인교야 말이라.
What you say is correct. There needs to be this established convention, not just one person on their own. So therefore, with the illustration that we had with different cultures, they both would be correct, although they approach the same object in a different way, calling it something different, ascribing different characteristics to it, but it is in accordance with their particular conventions. And if, with your illustration of someone who's creating something new, through their process of initial conception, design and development and creation, they will have developing meaning generalities in their consciousness. And at that process, throughout that process, they will have ascribed a name. The name may change, but they will have ascribed a name. So, and then when it's created, they will announce the name and the object's function, and people will then accept that the object that can perform this function is now called whatever. So this person gets given an interesting title. They call the abbot of spelling, because if you think of the situation of ordination, the abbot imputes name onto the newly ordained person. So similarly, the inventor is the abbot who's imputing name onto their newly created invention. So there we go. And then a further way that we can approach this is that one object can be known by many names, and all those names can be valid. For example, I refer to a bumpa. Those reading Sanskrit will read in the same text, and the object being referred to as kalash. We, though, will use the word vase. All talking about the same object, but different language is imputing a different term onto the same object, although it fulfills the same function.
When you say that no phenomena exist independently of mental imputation, what is the definition of phenomena, and what is the definition of mental imputation, for instance, and what are the Tibetan words?
What is the definition? So when we talk about there's no phenomena that exists independent of imputation by mind, then what is the definition of phenomena and the definition of imputation by mind, and what are the Tibetan words for them? Okay, so I'll give you the Tibetan. So phenomena, there are many words. There's che, there's yopa, there's a few others. And then imputation by mind, le, ming, tak. So there you go. There are also different le, mind, ming, tak. Yeah, so imputed by mind. Le taksam, sorry. Le taksam, not mind. Le tak, not ming. Le tak. Yeah? Le being awareness, tak being impute. Okay?
So it's not to do with ming.
No, that's
not to do with giving it a name.
No. If you ask for imputation by mind, if you ask for imputation by mind and term, or mind and your mind and term, then it'll be le, ming, tak. But if you want just imputation by mind, which is mostly what was said, then le, tak.
Le, tak, say, karita gorsan, ming, da, or le, pa, da, ming, say, o, bumpa, said, le, pa, da. Yang Gabriel, yopa, said, da. Then they could die, le, da, yore, said, le, pa, da, parwa. The Bumba race and Palo Tavarwa. Jizan Kulu Ta City, Lu Carita goes in Ming Tayore, Yova Setayore, that Chembu Setayada, and then Jiggy Chunchu said that Ning Jibu Setayada, the nigga that Kokichi Hamara Kolu Dashorwa, that you were dancing. Ah, che. Yebalana Tsime Juba level. Yebalana Tsime Juba. Chulana Ranging Gasa Ranging more Zimba series. Ranging more Zimba. Tsime Mipa, Tsime Juba, don't not Tsime Mibas, Tsime Juba Chagor, Tsime Mibas, Tsime Mibala do Luigi, Lu Tsamachi, called Dugu Yoba call Yoba, Elegor, that don't did it. Yobalan. More Zimba like a Rangi Mo, Lotsamaji, Tingio Banzanko, and it's chair like originally.
So first, before I forget, the definition of phenomena, if I understood it correctly, is apprehending its own essence. So something like that. So that's the definition of phenomena. And then imputed by mind. So what is generally meant by imputed by mind is name is imputed by mind. But not only name. All characteristics are imputed by mind. So that something exists is imputed by mind. That something is large is imputed by mind. That something is small is imputed by mind. So it's many things, or maybe innumerable things, are imputed by mind. Okay?
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
I mean, large and small seems obvious because they're relative to mental construct, but exist doesn't seem relative. I mean, if there's no sort of basis, no appearance arising, there's no need to impute something.
Okay, so what question do you want me to ask? I understand it now, but
so,
a question?
Yeah, so you're saying that mental imputation, you could say you impute large, you impute small, you impute existent. You seem to exist to me. Whether I say large or small is relative to a whole other
and the hours needed. The Chimbu said the Benaron. Yoba Mebasne. Yoba, the Shindong Tona, Migi, Shindong Penny, Meadow, now Penny Meadow, do like the Meadow, Yore Segura. Nala Lapa Yore said the Tagor was Yore, said Tagorua. Chisanga said Lapa Yore, said Tagor, Lupa Tagor, Yore said. Cousin Della Lapachi, Della Yore said the Yore, said Tagorua. Ins in Tagor, mother.
Dingo in yet so down Tumpo Yenamina Kandasako get it. Kaza is a Gongida and Taki.
Ribong rade ko yo khoro yo marwa. Ribong go la ra yu me de mi thong go ra de de war ti ro de ko. Ribong ra se ming ta di ribong ma tha rang bo de ribong cheben ko ribong am cho de jing bo ro am cho jing bo ro tu chi de tha rang bo de 매기 고려 라조기 되게 semje du sam고 라조 암초들 추이제 라조 du sam고 될야는 일본 고라 라조 세밍다 동원이 응원에서 tumba 말이디 디밍 대송원에서 tumba 말에 돼서
So when we say we impute existence, then you say, for example, if one sees a flower, you impute that is a flower and it exists, or you impute that this is your arm and it exists. So this is how one would impute existence. You impute that yes, this is, I have an arm. That's how one would impute existence.
So that does sound like it's all about names. I mean, the difference is, say...
That's about existence, not about names, right? So
well,
you're saying that this is, or this have, that is being imputed. Yeah, it's a dependence on mind, dependence on consciousness, that this is an arm, that is a flower. Not about, I'm having to use a name to say what I'm talking about, but not imputing flower onto the object, that's imputing the name, but that is a flower. So really it's more that is a flower.
Right.
Okay?
I guess I'm trying to get to the root of, I just can't understand this thing of phenomena only exist through mental imputation. Because when I'm hearing your voice, there are sound waves in my eardrums, I can describe this phenomena, or I can say your name, I'm sorry I don't know your name, but you are speaking to me. You can describe it in a number of different ways, but clearly something is happening, not nothing is happening. And it doesn't seem to be happening because I'm mentally imputing it. If I say that you are speaking to me and you're a Gelugpa ordained monk, then I'm imputing that. Based on your robes and your position. But the fact that sound waves are hitting my eardrum doesn't seem mentally imputed.
Okay.
Ini penangi kena kening, kena berapa di sama le tagiadet. Ini penangi drachik bu, kane mung tagiadet.
Man.
Kasi kungi dokter so di jobber kola.
The dragi ming tago marwa. Drada amcho ko gogorwa. Denigi amcho koyarwa de bene charangi bene ngarajogi michigeta tsiring seaji 직시셰도 하는 암초기 가르고서 칠링세버 자주 고고로와 지자다 아주 삼는 나게 이기 셰버게 남산 갈수 코 칠링레 세데 칠링디 바 이기 셰비 봤다 거래 코 칠링레스 베네 미지도 칠링 미 아주 미숨미바네 미지기 대코 칠링 여기 미디 칠링 마 고고 말니 네라도 칠링 마쇼 나 집에나 아니 그 민디 칠링세 암초 고서로와 투가 갈아서 미딜이야 치링 라빈세레선 치링 레샤스 치링디 콜 치링 라고도 와서 베게 삼도 나네 디콜고로와 제선 삼도 디기 치링 콜 치링 라고도 선베 제 치링디 르 달고로와
이네 콘소디 여가네 콜도 거야 칸스 디 learning partner le yoga tagi요데 디 콜도 콘도 거야
르 민타나 요바 달고르스네
메마마데 le yoga
제가 여바다 그러서는 아주 될야지 될야 여바선 민디 뢰다고 그러거든. 제가디 뢰바다 말에 마도 여바면 내냐만 그 당보라비도 될에 두바선 민다셔는 두보도 여바스 비슷한 말아. 제가 뢰 여바스 피디기 여라서 뢰바다 그러와 여바데. 뢰마다네 뢰바마다네 여바스 차기야 말아.
Referring to his book, for the book to exist there requires consciousness to perceive it. So therefore...
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. So for the book to exist before me, it requires consciousness to impute it. Yeah? Not talking about imputing book, but impute that that the book exists, that this exists before me. Yeah, so it does require consciousness.
It requires a perceiver.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
It needs to be perceived.
it needs to be perceived.
Perceived, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that what Thakpa means?
Thakpa is to impute or to designate.
Right. Which is different from perceived. Sorry, I mean, maybe this is...
Maybe this is. So maybe we take some other questions and then some more thought, and then maybe it becomes a bit clearer. Okay. Okay. Simple.
My experience with this difficulty of Western sort of division or paradigm of objects is very different from the Buddhist tradition of objective knowledge. So I think if the question was, what's the definition of object in Buddhism, that's because it's tied to knowledge or experience. I think it's more helpful.
The definition then of object of knowledge.
Well, the
or
definition
object.
of object or experience is object of knowledge, so
Okay.
it's tied to experience.
Okay. Okay. I'll try.
Endura.
Endure?
Yeah, it's endura object is defined.
Endure.
Objects in
Oh, endurance. I did particularly drinking me to shit. And also,
직도한다들 납득이 되네.
den Dudananda konso, also Karini you shady yodet. Is shedrup di mare.
신 봐, 신.
Shen mare. Also yoga and also go. Then it chip also shady yodet. In the other book, I did it. Shecha kiteni karine. Tsepoki shecha ki tseni hapona chikja pengi.
그래서 시자. 그래서 시자래. 뢰 리버 자와서. 뢰 리버 자. 뢰 도에기 유디시고. 뢰 리버 자. 그래서 시자. 뢰.
So correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know it. I'm just translating live. But what is known by awareness is an object of knowledge. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
From what you recall? Yeah. So what is known by awareness is an object of knowledge.
시자라는 하고야기 유디시고라. 시 수식의 로기 참 로기 하고야기 유디라 시자라.
Because the sheja, then you will be particular.
단다직발에 민가를 맡아서.
So objects and objects of knowledge, this is the same thing, or phenomena, this is the same thing.
시자, 여바, 아니지 유 시줍세데 민가가르만 시줍세데 민가가다 단다직발.
Established base, object, phenomena, objects of knowledge, different names, same meaning. So maybe that helps, an object of knowledge, something that is known by consciousness, by awareness. Okay. Thank you.
So by definition, no phenomena can exist independent of consciousness.
Yes. Yes.
나 돈다 지르셔. 여바 세디 돈다 가르려나 세마지게 로 세마지게 도구 여바 있나? 그 여바래. 세마지게 도구 매바 있나? 여바 매바래다. 여바다 매바 세야지. 로 세마지게 그 도구 있나? 여바래. 로 세마지게 도구 매나? 매바래. 여바 매바스 디래.
The meaning is that for an object to exist, it needs to be realized by a valid cognizer. So not just known by any consciousness, but by a valid cognizer. Okay.
야네야도 고마를 것 야네야도 지워다는 배하고 되게 고 배 쌍마야 하고 그래. 아주 저랑 날들에 야야야 배 제가 자고 제가 다오 근데 dunda직이 직 dunda직이야 dunda직이 숨스 되게 직파 망보치 파시 수시 직 심주 된다면 되게 야네야도 지워다 바치도 내가 아주 삼로디 딜람디 디체 삼로 리버디 파 장로 그래. 제가 디누도 제바체도 되는 거에서도 that didn't see to us about to a check or the Yana and the Jordan Bear.
The style of questioning is really excellent. This is exactly the same process we follow on the debate ground. On the debate ground, we move through the text very slowly, and we spend many weeks looking at the same topic. And by asking ever deeper questions, not being satisfied with our initial understanding or what we learn from others, coming ever deeper, clearing away potential misunderstandings until we get to a clear answer. This is the process we take in debate. And the purpose is to come to train our mind, to develop our analytical knowledge, our analytical skills. And this is, as we looked at in previous weeks, essential to come to actually understand reality. So again, this style of questioning is excellent.
Yeah. I'm more than I do now. Some go that the young me and do it not to your doing is a big in a more Messimba sound which I take Gemsuch, the neck and Unimed. Yana, did you?
The style of questioning you've employed that I've grown up with, my English teacher, Kathy at the back, she's on the receiving end of this every single lesson. Because I keep asking, what about this? What about that? Is it used in this situation? Why not in that situation? But the word literally means this, but now you're telling me it means that. All of these questions. But fortunately, Kathy's very broad-minded and also a very kind and patient person. So she takes this constant barrage of questions as I'm analyzing and trying to understand the reality of how this word is used. And so, fortunately, she's got the personality that can take all this questioning.
Yeah, then that, okay.